such a mammoth undertaking. You know, I mean, what inspired?
Who would be stupid enough to do that?
Exactly.
Well, I've always been a passionate history student. I love history. I've always been interested in history as narrative rather than necessarily academic history. So as a student, I was always thinking, God, wouldn't it be amazing to be there? And actually that really is what propelled me into sort of frontline journalism, a desire to have a front row seat on the events of my lifetime. But I've always been prone, whether with novels or whatever, to the idea of kind of the luxury of mentally going and putting yourself back in an era for a time. And Lucy Bedford from Across just came to me, and I just thought, wow, that is a brilliant idea. And I started reading about it, and I thought it was a fascinating period of history, not just because of the fire, but I think Charles II is one of, you know, our most interesting kings. You know, I was kind of fascinated by the way that our Republican experiment kind of petered out for no particular reason other than that everyone was a bit bored of it. And, you know, that's why we've still got a monarchy today, was, you know, because of the restoration of Charles II. So there was an awful, and the fire was one of his defining moments. He was a rather interesting character who, you know, his father had his head chopped off and all the rest of it. So I just thought there was so much there. And of course, as a writer, once you start getting really, you know, interested and excited about that kind of stuff, the story immediately sort of starts forming in your head. And the second meeting I had with Lucy, I kind of said, well, yeah, I think I'd write this and this and this. And before you know it, I could see that she knew she had me hooked, you know, because it was like you'd written half it in your head before I'd even got home in the taxi. So
on the face of it, historically, you know, a lot of information about it, but the thing that comes across is the way it's humanised, which is all about the writing. You know, the characters, the characterisation. So how did you do that?
Well, I suppose the first thing is you start reading about the character. I mean, I'm obviously, you know, I've been a frontline journalist for 25 years for ITV, covered many disasters, been in many uncomfortable situations, and so your interest in that situation is always in the human beings in it. You know, you're not interested necessarily in the pictures of what the earthquake looked like from a distance. They might be impressive for a few minutes, but it's watching how people cope with it in those terrible circumstances that's really compelling. And if you're not interested in human beings and humanity and how people behave under stress, the good, the bad, then you really shouldn't be a journalist, because the way you tell stories is not going to be at all compelling. Ultimately, that's exactly the same in film or drama or novels. And, you know, you read about something like this, but unless you're going to be really interested in how people are coping with losing their homes. I mean, imagine losing everything. I mean, everything in a day when there was no money in a bank or anything. You literally, your house burnt down. Everything you had of any, you don't, all you've got is the clothes you're standing up in. That is it. You know, it's just, of itself, that was a fascinating concept, which is alien to modern audiences. And of course, you then want to know, well, how did these people cope with this? And it must have put them under immense stress. How did they deal with that? What pressures? And, you know, I've always found with those big disasters and everything else, watching the way, you know, different people cope with it differently. Some people, pressures in a relationship come to the fore. Some people are very heroic. Some people are quite nasty. Some people are very selfish. And I want to just sort of find a way to put all that on screen.
The central character of Thomas Fariner, that's very interesting, especially the relationship in the first episode with his sister-in-law. Why did you create that particular relationship?
Complicated being in love with your brother's wife, isn't it? I don't have a brother, so that's good. I kind of knew that Thomas Fariner had to be the heart of the story for obvious reasons. You know, structurally, he really needed to be. I read a bit about his life. There didn't seem anything completely obvious to be at the heart of it. And I can't remember why I came up with the idea of, you know, him being in love with his brother's wife. But I just thought he needed some really central, immediately accessible human story that would drive him through this drama. And that was the idea I came up with kind of pretty quickly, actually, I think almost immediately. I think actually in early drafts his wife was still alive, and then when we thought, well, no, he won't be a very attractive character if he's an adulterer. So I changed that. But it fairly immediately that was the case. And I have to say, they're both great actors, Andy and Rose, because in the first 3 minutes, even though I've put virtually nothing on the page in terms of dialogue, you kind of know they're in love with each other.
When you're writing a script like that, when you're setting in the middle of this huge, huge fire, this amazing historic event, are you thinking about, oh my God, how are they ever going to film that?
Quite a lot, yeah. There's also them thinking, how on earth are we going to film that? And obviously there's a bit of toing and froing about them saying, that's a nice idea, Tom. If you could just find 10 million quid more, we could definitely do that. On the other hand, you could rewrite it in a manner that we could film. I think also what it tended to be was that huge, great, dramatic. I mean, I wrote a scene at one point where the king and his brother are trying to stop the fire leaping the Fleet ditch, and I'm sure if we could have shot it, it would have been very dramatic. But it didn't actually take the story on particularly, and we ended up substituting it for a scene in which they're around the tower and blowing up buildings with gunpowder, which also was a sort of historic turning point. In fact, a more important turning point as it happens, and much easier to film and much more dramatic to look at. So we could have spent 10 million quid filming my Fleet ditch scene, but it wouldn't have added much, and it probably wouldn't have looked that good. So funnily enough, the producers said, let's film this scene which you had the idea of, and not this scene which is going to cost a lot and not look great.
In this age of X Factor and reality TV, what do you think will drive the public to watch it?
Well, hopefully, because it's a damn good story, well told. I mean, I'm interested, I've got teenage kids, the oldest 18. The interesting thing about them is they are really not at all interested in who made stuff, how it got made. I mean, they couldn't care less. They just, via social media, they find stuff that they like, that's said to be good, and they go and watch it. And if it works, they'll tell their friends to watch it. And you watch some series and dramas grow exponentially around the world, and everyone is now looking for that massive global success like Downton. There's something that goes around the world. But it's the same as everything. It's the same as everyone's looking for the same thing. Everyone's looking for great stories well told, and if you can do a great story well told, then you'll get an audience, and if it's not a good story well told, it won't.